Welcome beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy. Like countless others, Reiki found me when I wasn't even looking, and then it ignited a whole new world of questions. This podcast explores topics of interest for the spiritually curious. Join me for discussions and special guests on subjects such as past lives, crystal healing, spiritual awakening, ascension, energy healing, and more, all to assist and inspire you along your unique soul's journey. This episode is sponsored by Mainstream Reiki, offering live and online Reiki classes and a membership community to help Reiki practitioners succeed and grow in their practice. Find out more at mainstreamreiki.com. We're beyond the Reiki Gateway with Shannon Keating. Welcome to the show. Shannon is a holistic life coach specializing in empowering women, young adults, teen girls, and preteens. She brings a lot to the table as a certified nutritional therapy practitioner, guided meditation teacher, and human design reader, as well as her educational background in hypnotherapy and intuitive development. Like most young women, Shannon faced common modern-day challenges growing up and overcame them using mental, emotional, and spiritual tools. Shannon, I'm really excited to get to talk with you because, this is a topic that's, I think, really juicy, really interesting. But given the fact that you specialize in helping those people, that's a little unique. And so I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me just say welcome and thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited you're having me on and looking forward to what we get to talk about.
Yeah. So I guess, you mentioned your background overcoming some things when you were younger. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit to add a little context, as to how you're doing what you're doing now? Because it seems like they're related.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that question. They are very much related. I feel like a lot of what I experienced when I was younger is why I do the work that I do today. I also believe that I like to say that I was gifted the challenging experiences when I was younger in order to cultivate the resiliency and the self-love and all of the knowledge, wisdom, and tools to be able to do what I do today. So while I was going through it, obviously I was not seeing things from that perspective always. It was very challenging, but now I'm 30 years old now. And from this place, having healed and overcame a lot of the things, I can see the higher perspective. I can see the gifts, the blessings, the whole journey as it unfolded, why I need to experience different things. And then just to go into some of what I experienced, because it's quite a list, which is, it's interesting. I list it on my website and I'll share with different people. And I know, for example, I was talking to the parent of one of my newer teen clients, and she was saying, Shannon, you've gone through all of that at 30 years old. Like, are you being serious? And I said, yes, I'm being serious. I'm not just listing all these things. I actually went through all of these things. And so just to kind of touch on some of them, and if you want to dive into any specifically, we can, but this is also why there's lots of different things that I coach young women on, different areas that I'm passionate about, from body image to mental health to relationships, because somewhat of what I experienced was, I like to say, the common modern day challenges, but one of the main ones was definitely around body image and food. So for me, a lot of my journey was just unraveling what I think a lot of women have to unravel, which is our worth is not directly connected to the size, the weight, the shape of our body, the appearance of our body, and our physical appearance. And I grew up in a household where there was so much dieting, so much diet culture and weight loss culture, and all of the women in my family were always on diets, my mother being one of those women. And I just soaked up a lot of that at a really young age and started to judge and nitpick my body at a really young age. I witnessed my older sister on diets with my mom when she started at like 12, 13 years old. And so that led me to spiraling into an eating disorder in my high school years. And it started as me just wanting to lose some weight, feeling as though I was overweight, feeling as though I was chubby and not wanting to be that, feeling a lot of shame. And then it spiraled into a full-blown eating disorder where I was restricting food a lot. I was both anorexic and bulimic, and I was really struggling. And so I had to go to Children's Hospital. I had to go to the outpatient program at Children's Hospital every single week. None of my friends knew about this. Just very few of my family members knew about this. It was very much an internal struggle. My parents knew, my younger sister knew, but nobody else knew. And I went through that for several years. And it was an agreement when I went to college that I had to continue to see a counselor, continue to see someone to get support. And it was probably during college and my post college years when I finally feel like I started to overcome that battle and that just difficult relationship with food and body image. And then on top of that, I also struggled a lot with my mental health. And so that was something from a really young age. I would go through cyclical depression where I would just have these episodes of feeling really, really low, very apathetic, very hopeless. It could have been triggered by something like a change, like moving when I was in second grade, or the end of a relationship, or something along those lines. But then sometimes it would just come out of nowhere, or I'd have an injury and then I'd get very depressed. And for me, when I was going through those depressive states, it also turned into a lot of suicidal ideations and a lot of I don't even need to be here. I don't want to be here. What is the point of this? A lot of heaviness around just life and death, and feeling as though I didn't matter, which I know is something a lot of teens and just adult people struggle with around what does my life bring to the table? Why do I even matter? What am I contributing? If I weren't here, would it even matter to anybody? And I would spiral there for a while. And thankfully, I was very open and honest with family members about those struggles. And I leaned on my younger sister. I would lean on my dad. I would lean on therapists. And then eventually, friends, I would open up to different friends about it. Now I'm on the other end of both of those challenges, but those were really difficult. And the depression and suicidal ideations went into my 20s. And it was one of those things where I'd be like, oh gosh, I'm here again. And like, when am I going to really get beyond this? And I'm someone who I don't very much believe in medication for myself. I like to approach things very holistically. So I never went on medication for anything. Yet I would see, therapists and different counselors and life coaches. And so that kind of led me down the spiritual path of figuring out, okay, how can I lean on meditation and things like energy healing to actually heal like the root of what's going on here. And then the last thing I'll share is I also struggled with a lot of health challenges. So I got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition in my 20s, and I had a few different gut infections and parasites in my 20s as well. And so that was also challenging. I had psoriasis, so I had a full body rash all over my just entire body. I had no idea what to do. My mom also struggled with psoriasis, but she went more down the conventional route to try to heal it for herself, but just struggled for years and years. And at that point, I'd already been doing a lot of self-study with nutrition and food as medicine. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do this holistically. And I tossed, the steroids that I'd been prescribed in the trash and just went full holistic with food. And I used essential oils and different creams and whatnot, and actually visualized and meditated and probably did my own energy healing on myself. Who knows? And I got rid of it though in a matter of months, and it's been in remission, and that's been really beautiful. And it took me quite a few years to get through my gut health challenges, but I got on the other end of that. So those are the main ones that, I went through tough times when it came to body image, food, my health, and my mental health. And then, of course, there's just the things like comparison and heartbreak and those different things people navigate. But I would say those are the biggest parts of my journey. And that's why everything I do is ultimately around helping people get to know themselves, really love themselves, learn how to heal from the inside out. And a lot of people do come to me because they want to explore holistic solutions to a lot of these things people are facing nowadays. And then especially with the younger girls, a lot of parents want to avoid medication as much as possible for their daughters. And if they can get tools for them to feel their emotions or learn how to love themselves or balance out their mindset and their mental health without having to go to medication or something like that, I think that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things in the introduction that I said, one of those words was empowerment. And I, I just love that because I think now's the time. Now is the time for this. And people have, I guess I will say, especially women and girls, right, have felt less than, have been treated in less than ways. And there, I guess a certain level of agreement to that, right? And now it's like we're not really agreeing. More people are saying, "You know what? I'm not agreeing with that anymore." And so that's a huge shift, not just for the women and young women and girls, but really for everyone that they have relationships with too. I mean, ooh, that can cause a ripple effect when somebody starts coming into their own power. Um, I'm wondering, what your thought is about where we are in this moment, because, you mentioned you're 30, I'm
Mhm.
51. And so it's interesting to me to have you on to get your perspective. This generation that, your younger clients, the younger
Mhm.
people that you're working with, can you shed some light on n how their lives are, or what they are struggling with that is very unique?
Yes, thank you for this question because I know all the behind the scenes of all of it because I keep a pulse point on it, and then my clients just share everything with me. A lot of it has to do with social media, which I think we all are aware. So the interesting thing is it's just fascinating to me because I work with girls from 12 years old up into their 20s, and they're all going through similar things. And they're all going through similar things that I experienced, with the comparison, with the feeling not good enough, with the body image challenges, with the feeling as though they have to be skinny. They're obsessed with skinny and that's best. And with their aesthetic and how they look and how people perceive them, and fitting in, and then friendship drama and putting their worth into what, romantic partners think of them. And all of those things are still threads and existing. However, they also have so much exposure to social media now. They're growing up with phones and little iPad watches on their wrists. I mean, at 10, 11, 12 years old, every single girl now has a little iPad watch or a little device or some type of way to message her friends or get connected to her parents or see YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or see what's out there. And unfortunately, a lot of what's out there is not empowering, and it's not providing young women with confidence, and it's not empowering them to think they can just be themselves and love themselves. A lot of it is breeding comparison around, oh, there's these little tiny, beautiful, fit women Instagram influencers or TikTok influencers or YouTube influencers that are now impressionable towards these girls. And then there's group text chats that there's a lot of cyberbullying happening, or there's getting kicked out of group text chats, or there's things like that girls and people are saying that are mean. So there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of influence from technology. Parents do their best, but they can't censor everything that their kids are exposed to. And it's just happening at a really early age where girls are just being exposed to all of this stuff that they don't always have the higher self or the awareness of, okay, this isn't real life and I shouldn't compare myself. And, this kid maybe said something mean towards me because they're hurting inside. They don't always have that perspective available to them or at their, accessible to them. So then it's really challenging on top of just everything else they're navigating with mental health and with pressure from school and pressure on their appearance and pressure to achieve and everything that I think most people can relate to. It's just a little more difficult when you also have the social media and the technology on top of it that you cannot avoid nowadays.
Absolutely. When you were talking, I was thinking about when I was growing up. And, we had, I mean, I can speak for myself on this. We had dieting too in my household.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I would hear comments, in my own family
Mm-hmm.
about how people's weight and things like that. And so it put me on the lookout. It's like, ooh, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that. But I think my memory, though, about where the messages other than that were really coming from, it would be the line at the grocery store, right? The checkout line with all those magazines.
Yeah.
And so for somebody, who grew up in a similar time frame, that was pretty much, I think, our level of technology. Well, that and Charlie's Angels, right? I mean, Charlie's Angels. I remember watching that
Yes.
show and it was like, wow, I
Mm-hmm.
just thought that was those women on Charlie's Angels, it was like, oh, well, that's the ideal person. This is the ideal woman sort of thing. And
Hmm.
so it was either a television, which of course we didn't even have a DVR or anything, right? And so you had to watch the show when it came on. And so when you bring up technology, that is huge because we can pretty much make a playlist of exactly what it is we want to see,
Hmm.
when we want to see it. And so that keeps us in a bubble, so to speak. And so if we don't choose well, we're feeding ourselves a diet of certain input there. But then the social media, we largely don't have control over a lot of the things that we are shown.
Yeah.
And that can be very repetitive because the algorithm. So you click on one thing, you know, and maybe that is negative. And then you get to see more and more and more of that. And so, yeah, there's no real refuge, right? And you mentioned about the parents. I really can't imagine having children today. I don't know what I would do with all
Yeah.
of the technology. Can you talk about what do you recommend for parents with this whole, and even grandparents today, um, with the technology and the younger generation? Because you're right, you can't censor it all. But
Mm-mm.
but what advice do you have?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question because it is, you can't censor it all. And there also is a level of you want your kid to feel like, I work with girls so that she's fitting in and she's belonging and she can message her friends and she can, if they're on TikTok chatting, she can be a part of that. And you want her to feel like she's included in the culture of today and not completely isolated from that. I do know parents who they won't give their kid a phone yet, or they have a lot of strict rules around social media. And I think that's also a route you could venture into around having boundaries and guidelines. So, whatever those boundaries and guidelines are, I guess that first advice would be I think it is important to give kids boundaries and guidelines around phones, around social media, around how long they're on certain things, how much time they're spending on certain things. I know some parents I'll talk to and they have, a 1 hour limit of YouTube a day or something like that. And if the kid goes above that, the parent has to unlock it with a certain passcode. So I would definitely set very clear boundaries, explain those boundaries to these kids so they understand there's a why behind this. I'm thinking of your health, I'm thinking of your mental health, I'm thinking of you getting outside and just being in real life. I want you to be doing more of that. I want you to be comparing yourself less, like talking about the why behind it. But I think establishing healthy boundaries, having those written down, having those clear. I'm also a very firm believer in kids follow parents and there's mirror neurons and they see what the parents are doing and they will take note of what parents are doing. So I also like to tell the parents, especially when it comes to like anything, body image, food, self-love, any of these topics I'm working on with girls, helping the mother establish these for herself too. So when it comes to boundaries with tech or phone usage, then it goes into, okay, parents, don't be on your phone a ton when you're around your kids and have your own boundaries and be mindful of what you're consuming because they're going to see, if you're telling them, hey, you only get 30 minutes, but then they see you on your phone all the time, that's mixed messaging and they're not going to respect you or trust you and what you're trying to share with them and what you're trying to instill upon them. So I would say it goes both ways. So being really mindful of your own boundaries, your own usage, in addition to setting those boundaries with kids. And the second thing that I really like to recommend in households, and I do parent coaching too, so I'll coach parents around this, is creating that safe space for the kids, the preteens, the teens, young adults to open up to you and have conversations about what's happening. So they know if there is cyberbullying going on, or they got kicked out of a text chat with friends, or something was said that was mean to them, they can talk to you about it. And or they can talk to, their coach about it, their counselor about it. They have spaces where it's not just them dealing with this on their own. They can actually turn to the parents and talk about it. And then also same goes for if they're comparing themselves to someone they're seeing on YouTube, like a little YouTube star or on whatever it happens to be, they can also have those conversations with you. I think mom can be a really, really safe space. Dad can too, or whoever the parents are. But those types of conversations are so crucial around, hey, I was, seeing X, Y, and Z on social media today, and I don't feel good about myself, or I'm comparing myself to these girls, and actually opening up to the parents and just being honest. And then parents can kind of reflect back. I do the same thing. Let's talk it through. Let's make sure you feel supported in this. What's a good boundary to set? And just those open conversations around the situations, I think can help a ton, because social media, it's just, we constantly have to be monitoring this relationship with tech and social media, all of us, no matter what our age is. And I think if we can teach the younger generations that, and teach them it's okay to be comparing, it's okay if you scroll a lot, it's okay if there's an addiction, but let's talk about it, let's discuss it, let's make sure it doesn't, get out of hand here, let's set boundaries around it, let's actually help you navigate this, let's actually navigate this together. I think that's going to help with the solution.
What stood out to me there was this balance between out input from social media, or whatever outlet that is, whatever platform, but this input, but there needs to be output in a constructive way. So you can take they can take in information, but then they need to let information out, feelings out, emotions out, process that. And I just think that that's such a great point that you made, because to do these things in isolation can be really damaging. And the voices in the head, I mean, I don't care what age we are, ooh, the voices in our heads can just be so powerful. And so to discuss it and communicate, like what you're saying, can make the difference, really make the difference. How do parents, though, walk that line between parenting and, confidant friendship with their children?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's also where I think it's important, and this is another solution that I'm working on right now, is making sure that girls have they have multiple spaces where there's openness around these conversations. So I love how you phrased it as, the input and the output, because it's a lot to take in, but then not to express what they're actually feeling or thinking or experiencing day to day, but needing that outlet. And so parents can be a good source. But then also, what I've been working on right now is some after school clubs for girls where there's safe spaces for them to discuss topics like this. So we talk about body image, we talk about friendship drama, we talk about social media usage, we're talking about your inner critic and your self talk. So there's spaces right outside of just the parent to kid dynamic where they can talk amongst their peers. And there's two adults kind of facilitating the whole thing, or it could be going to a school counselor, or any type of, empowering girls group could be a really great place. But again, an emphasis on that word empowering, again, coming back around, because otherwise what can happen is it can end up being a lot of like gossiping, or a lot of just like whining about the issues, or just talking about, oh yeah, this girl's so mean, and then they're just kind of wallowing in the issue. So there needs to be a structure set up so it's not just drama or complaining or gossiping, and it's actually more uplifting and it's supportive. But that's one thing that I feel is a good solution, is getting them to camps or girls groups or places where there is safety and openness to explore and discuss these things amongst their peers. And then when it comes to the parent dynamic, I feel like there is a fine line where the parent does need to make sure they are still maintaining that they're a parent. And I think that can be done in a very intentional, healthy way. And I think a lot of ways that can be done is just through, instead of, again, I think the parent has to recognize that she has a role in influencing her daughter, right? Say it's a mother, that there is a role in influencing her daughter. And instead of going to the level of, right, the drama or the, oh yeah, kind of going into that place, making sure she's coming from a higher perspective as she's relating to whatever the daughter's talking about. So I think it's more about, okay, the parent knowing, okay, I am space holding for my daughter right now. I'm not buddying up to my daughter right now. And so making sure she's aware of that role where, okay, I'm not just here like chatting about friendship drama and chatting about the annoyance of social media with my daughter. I'm holding space for my daughter to share that with me and confide in me. And I'm making sure she feels safe to do so and not judged by me. And then offering nuggets of guidance. And so again, parent being that guide, that mentor, that parent figure for the daughter, I think offering little seeds or plants of guidance. It could be something like, I went through that too when I was your age, and this helped me. Or would it feel good for you to talk to a coach, a counselor, a therapist about this? Or, you know what? I think what would be a good idea is if we set some boundaries around X, Y, and Z. How does that feel? So again, just making sure the parent is grounded and positioning themselves or herself, mom, dad, whoever, as I'm still a parent here. I'm not a buddy. I'm not a friend. And we can still open up and confide in one another and have that, I think, really healthy, open dialogue amongst each other where she can share and she can, open up and express and dump and just know that she doesn't have to hold everything in.
We've talked a lot about, I guess, conversations, modeling, things like that. What else do you bring into the mix for them to help them uh, feel empowered?
What I like to provide are solutions ultimately and tools to lean on when they're feeling a type of way, when they're thinking some type of thing, when they're going through a challenge around maybe it's body image, or maybe it's food, or maybe it's comparison, or maybe it's my friend was just mean to me. So I'll kind of give some specific examples, but a lot of it would be a journaling exercise, or it'd be a tool for how to feel your emotions, or it would be here's step by step how to have, I call them like uncomfy conversations with friends. So things around, okay, here's a step-by-step process for communicating. Here's a step-by-step process for feeling an emotion. Here's a journaling process for, outletting whatever you're feeling in relation to something. So kind of more specifically, say a girl's coming to me and, okay, here's a great example of something that happened last week. So she was really upset because, and I'll share this completely anonymously, but this is something that I see often. So just like one kind of example, she was very upset because a boy made a comment about her weight, and it was just spiraling in her mind. And this girl in the past, she's a teen, and she's been struggling with food and body image. And that's been a focus in our sessions. And we've been working around that. And so she's gotten to this place where she was upset because she was feeling super confident and okay. And then this boy made a comment, and then it's spiraling with her for the entire week. So what we did in the session was, the first thing is, okay, I'm going to space hold for you. Just tell me exactly what's been going on in your mind right now in relation to what just happened. So the first tool is actually share out loud. What are you thinking? What are you experiencing? And so she shared with me about how now she's nervous to eat in front of him, and she's been looking in the mirror and picking her body apart in different ways, and all these things that she's thinking and feeling. So she doesn't have to hold those inside. So that's one tool that I do in sessions. And then I also teach them outside of sessions, whether it's in your journal, whether it's, if you have a phone, you can voice note dump this out. We can find some safe spaces with a parent figure or with certain friends of yours. So I always help girls identify certain friends that are really safe spaces for them, and then teach them how to ask, hey, do you mind just listening while I dump or vent or dump something? I don't really need you to fix anything, but I have some thoughts and worries, and I'd love for you just to listen to me. So I teach them that tool first and foremost. And we do that in sessions a lot around, okay, if something just happened and you need to process, there's a journal, there's a voice note, there's physical people that you can share with. So that's fundamentally one. And then the second thing was, what we went into was, I like to help them go into clearing the emotions that were maybe triggered in that experience. And so we can do that through hypnotherapy, a little guided meditation, something like Reiki. We can clear the emotional energy behind the trigger. So that's another tool I bring to the table. So for this girl specifically, we went back to the memory of him sharing and saying that comment. And I had her actually connect to how she's feeling in her body, how she felt in her body when that all happened, and actually emotionally processing it and visualizing giving it back to him and just sending it back, breathing it all the way through her body. For her, it was a lot in her stomach. So actually processing the emotion and not feeling scared to go into that shame or that emotional pain, and not feeling like she has to hold on to it. So we kind of clear the emotion out first and foremost. And then another tool I like to share with them, and this is just like giving some specifics in a contextual way, is I like to help them, okay, is there anything that you really needed to say to this person? And so either they'll write a letter maybe to that boy, for example, or she'll say out loud what she wishes to say to him or in her head, she'll say what she wants to say to him. And this is like, she doesn't have to get him involved. She's not going to actually say this to him in this situation. In some situations, it is appropriate, but not in this specific one. So then I'll help her to, okay, let's express what you need to say. Let's get it out. And then another tool would be kind of wrapping this process up in two ways. One would be, what is the bigger perspective? So something that I'm skilled at is helping them to see the bigger perspective of what's happening. And so helping her to see, okay, this boy, and we'll chat this through, but this boy, he has body image insecurities and he's insecure about his body image. He's a little bit of a bigger guy. He's kind of a little bullying type of energy. And so sharing with her, it's actually not all about you. He has his own insecurities that unfortunately he dumped on you. He is talking about body image because it's something he's nervous and insecure about. And that's where it came from. And so helping her to not personalize everything and see that higher perspective of why he made the comment versus her going into, is this true about me? And so kind of zooming out and teaching them to see that higher perspective, especially around dynamics that are happening with friendships, because there's a lot of them that are happening, and seeing, oh, we always say, or people say, hurt people, but really instilling that wisdom on them so they know when people are making comments or are unkind or are bullying towards me, I'm not deeply personalizing and internalizing all of this. And so helping them to have an ability to zoom out, and it's helpful to do that with somebody else. And the last thing, just like a tool wise, is now what we're looking at is I like to help girls with like using the mirror in a positive way. So instead of her going into the mirror and nitpicking all the parts of her body, which we talked about that pattern, it's catching herself if she's in that pattern and going into, what is something I like about my appearance and my body right now that I can focus on? Or what's something I like about myself and how can I just compliment myself, and then walk away from the mirror. So that's like some kind of tool to do day to day. So I hope that kind of helped kind of a peek into things, but a lot of it is, again, using a journal or using a person or having a little bit of a tool around, okay, the mirror situation, now I'm going to focus on this when I look in the mirror instead of scrutinizing my body, nitpicking my body, going down that spiral. So it's helping them to take something practical and then apply it to their upcoming week, their upcoming months.
Yeah, very helpful. Really very helpful. Hello, it's Andrea, and in addition to being your host here at the podcast, I'm the founder of Mainstream Reiki, where bringing Reiki further into the mainstream is my mission. I offer quality Reiki classes of all levels to students attending live from around the world. And I've built a membership community as well to help Reiki people connect with each other through discussions, events, and Reiki practice. So if you're considering learning Reiki, or you already have, I invite you to visit mainstreamreiki.com to discover your next step in your Reiki journey. Thank you. And now, back to the show. Do the parents attend with the child or the young adult, or how does that work?
In sessions?
Mm-hmm.
No, they don't. So I always, like, at the start of working together, I always do either a session with parents and or a session with the parents and the daughter, and we just all talk. And sometimes I'll do a little segmentation where I talk to the parents and then I talk to the daughter, and then they all kind of discuss, and then, we choose to work together or not. But when it comes to sessions, I do it separately, and I'll do all the sessions are me and the daughter one-on-one. I'm her safe space. She can share anything. It's private. It's confidential. Of course, and she knows this too, if there's anything she shares that I need to tell the parents, I always do. But then I do parent check-ins monthly as well. So then I do separate sessions with the parents. So everything's kind of kept separate unless for whatever reason they wanted me to do something with all of them. But typically I talk to the parents, do a little coaching with the parents, share with them once a month kind of what we've been working on. If they have questions, they can ask me questions. And then just for the kind of So the daughter feels very comfortable. And especially in the teen years, they do not want their parents around. And they know I'm updating parents, but they'll be like, be as vague as possible. Don't tell mom all the things I'm telling you. So they want to know I have a safe space with Shannon. I can share anything, and she's not just going to directly tell a bunch of people about it.
Right. Oh, I would think that would have to be non-negotiable for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, I do like the check-in with the parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that that's really, um, I think it's very helpful, just to kind of get the pulse of what's happening, and,
Yes.
and also feel a little included, and also because, it is a shared experience, if we want the teen to offload, confide, share those personal feelings about social media or whatever, like what you were saying, um, that could go any number of ways.
Hmm.
So the checking in and all of that kind of thing, I think that's really, it's got to be so helpful.
Yeah. And because I want it to feel like I'm here supporting the dynamics of your family household as well. And I know from personal experience, when I went through my eating disorder in high school, my parents were terrified. They had no idea how to help me or what I was even navigating or why I was so down about my body and food and controlling things. I remember them reading books and trying to figure out the solutions and the answers to all their questions. So that's also where I really like to feel like I'm supporting the whole household here. The parents can be kept in. And then also, it kind of reassures me because if I'm teaching the girl about healthy communication or some type of strategy, I can tell the parents that and they can start supporting it in the household as well. So I feel like it just helps everything land a little bit deeper when the parents are kept in the loop.
Yeah. Do you find that the parents are reluctant themselves to seek mental health
Ooh,
help?
it's so dependent. Some are not. So it really just, yeah, my answer to that would be it totally depends. Some parents, I mean, they found me because they have their own coaches or therapists or healers that they work with, and they're on board with personal growth and personal development. So they're already doing it, but they want something specific for their daughters. And then some, I would say, yes, I have definitely run into parents where it can feel a little frustrating, to be completely honest on my end, because I want the parents to also be seeing a counselor, a therapist, a coach, somebody to be supporting them, and they're not quite, and they're kind of putting it on their daughter to do that healing work when they're not quite doing it themselves. So that can be a little bit of a frustrating experience, but I always have, compassion for people. But I've definitely seen it both ways where the parents are doing their own inner work and they see the value in it and they also want their daughter to. And then some that have some resistance to that, or they're just not quite understanding their impact on their daughter and they're seeing, their daughter's anxiety or eating disorder as her issue versus you could have contributed to this and that's okay. There's no blaming here, but it's good to see the whole picture of what could be happening in relation to your daughter. So, yeah, I definitely see both ways.
Yeah. I bet though that through you working with the daughters, there has to be parents out there or have to be parents out there that have seen transformation, seen positive results, and said, you know what? I think I'm gonna now go seek some support for myself.
Yeah, and what's actually interesting is because I work with both women and then niching into the younger girls and young adults, sometimes I work with both. So sometimes I do see mom and then she brings the daughter to me, or I see daughter and then mom starts to see me for sessions. And
Mm,
that does happen. Definitely.
yeah, I think that would be really amazing. Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. It just, when I was growing up, nobody, there was not, at least in where I grew up in my family, in my world, mental health was just not something that was really an option,
Yeah.
seeing people or therapists or anything like that. It just wasn't talked about.
Hmm.
Um, Nowadays, it's just much more common. And
Yes.
I do think the younger generation is leading a lot of the older generation down different avenues, whether it be help for, mental health, but also I think there are other areas to that too. What other challenges? We've talked a lot about social media. You mentioned some other things about body image and relationships and things like that. How are these young women,
Mm.
if you could sort of describe this younger generation and who these young women are, what's important to them? And I don't know, what do you think's so special about this group?
Oh, I really, really love this question. And I very much agree with you that they are leading the change. And I do come from a very spiritual perspective. So I feel like it has something to do with their souls, right? And their souls are like, okay, we are here to move us forward in this direction. And a lot of the generational healing needs to happen as well, and things that have been passed along. And then this is the generation of like, okay, it stops with us and we're bringing new tools to the table, and we're going to talk about things like mental health, and we're going to address these things that were just so not the norm, like you mentioned, and just so pushed aside. And I would say what's interesting with this generation too is, I mean, one, we talked about social media being just such a part of their lives. Another thing that's really important to them is freedom when it comes to work. So a lot of them, and this isn't everybody, but just collectively, especially in like the Gen Z generation, especially since COVID, they don't want to work a normal 9 to 5 job. They don't want to be tied to a desk or tied to a location anymore. They want to travel. They want to work from home a few days a week if they can. They want to work from coffee shops if they can. They want so much more flexibility and freedom in what they're doing. And they don't want to like work the way that past generations have really just worked to survive, and they've been tied to certain locations, and they've had to put lots and lots of hours in. This next generation wants to do things totally differently. And a lot of people are labeling them as lazy or different things when that's not always the case. It's just they've seen that you can do things differently. And with technology and with being able to use things like Zoom or being able to travel or just work in a different way, they've seen it happening, and they very much want to be a part of that. And in addition to that, I would say a lot of it too is just around, I think we talked about the whole mental health piece of being open about the dynamics when it comes to mental health and when it comes to just talking about feelings, not pushing things under the rug, talking about things like attachment theory, and just being really open about seeing a therapist or seeing a coach or getting support for mental health. And the last thing would be just the sexuality and identity conversation of, you could have different sexual orientations and sexualities and different identities, and there can be a lot more fluidity that this next generation just, they grew up being a lot more used to. So, okay, what are your pronouns? Or just girls becoming boys in elementary school or middle school or vice versa. They're very much more accepting around that. There's a lot more conversation around it. There's a lot more understanding. There's a lot more normalcy in these generations around dating different genders, not really deciding quite yet who you are, what your identity is, being much more fluid around that. So that's something that this generation also is very much bringing forward. And it's interesting because I'm kind of the bridge of it. And so I'll have conversations with my parents and then conversations with teens. And so I feel like I'm really in the middle of these two kind of worlds, and having to explain things like non-binary, explain things like trans to the older generations, that the younger generations just get it and accept it. Now, I'm not saying everywhere, but especially I'm here in San Diego, and I was in Denver before, and I was in Washington, D.C. before. So in these places, in schools, in these conversations I'm having with 5th and 6th and 7th grade girls, there's just so much more normalcy around it. It's something they see all the time. They understand these different identities, different sexual orientations in a way that the older generations, they just aren't quite understanding. The younger generations accept it and understand it, and they invite it in a lot more.
Yeah, that whole topic it would be completely foreign to me, if I look back when I was in school and growing up. We just never we just it just didn't exist, really. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
you bring up this judgment that they're lazy. And yeah, I kind of hear that sort of thing a lot. And hey boomer, on the other. So we have this kind of back and forth thing. I didn't we always kind of have that? Maybe just in a different context, of a generational sort of, I guess, misunderstanding.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And also, I guess to add to that, that just came to my mind too, is a lot of these girls, because I do a lot of work with, I mean, the girls that I'm talking to in middle school, they're worrying about friend drama. But then the girls I'm talking to who just graduated from college or are in college, they're really thinking about, what am I passionate about? What are my gifts? What do I want to do for work? So they're not necessarily lazy. They just don't want to do anything. They actually do want to do what they're passionate about. They want their work to really light them up. Whereas I think older generations, and not speaking to you because clearly you're doing what lights you up, and many people are, but I think generally it was more around, okay, are you decent at it? Can you get a good salary? Can you stick with it? Can you start to improve and make more and more if you stay here for 20 years? That type of mindset. It was a lot more practical and logical and just find a career and stick with it. This generation is, they're so much more mindful of, okay, I'm going to dabble into teaching, but I don't fully love it. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to find something that I'm really, really loving and really passionate about. So that's really important to them, is like their passion versus the paycheck at the forefront of their decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, that I love that you brought that up because I think that that's so true because there's a certain level of permission that one has to give themselves in order to do that. But oh, I can identify with that. I mean, I've had people in my own life and they hated their jobs. Probably a lot of people listening to this show can relate to this. Um, they've been in a certain career, certain line of work, and their heart is not in that. And it's
Mm.
just a soul sucking kind of existence. So I think in that regard, this judgment, so I think some of the judgment of these younger people is sort of like a who do you think you are kind of thing, to allow yourself all this freedom, all of this choice when they didn't have that or didn't feel as though that was an option for them because
Mhm.
the times were very different, right?
Very, very different. And I've had multiple conversations with my parents around this, because even what I do is so different to what my parents had at their fingertips when they graduated. My dad went into construction, my mom went into nursing. They stuck with it their whole entire lives. And for me, I've had a business for 6 years at this point, 6, 7 years, but it's evolved and it's pivoted, and I did nutrition and then I went here, and it's been this evolving process and just so, so different to my parents' journeys. And so just understanding where everyone's coming from and the why behind the choices. But I think you articulated it beautifully, of just freedom, but also choice. They're exercising their choice in a way that I think previous generations didn't feel like they even had the ability to. So there could be some resentment around that and just some confusion. And yeah, doing a job that you don't fully love, that's just sucking away at your soul. The perspective is, well, you have to do this to earn a living and to live. Whereas this other generation is saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to be broke, which is also an issue for parents sometimes, because kids are just living at home with mom and dad and they're broke, but they're like, no, but I just want to do what I love. So that's where I come in, because I can help guide that direction around career pathway. That's what I do a lot with the girls who are like 23, 24, because they're in this place of just a little bit of indecisiveness and a little bit of, oh my gosh, there's so many choices and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And how do I find the right thing? And LinkedIn and job searching. So that's another avenue I can mentor and guide them around. But it's an interesting space. It's very different.
Yeah, because us older people would say, well, maybe just go experiment, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just try something. And
Mm-hmm.
through the contrast, you can begin to feel what resonates with you and what doesn't, right? But the inaction lacks some contrast there sometimes. It's like, you might get a job that doesn't really appeal to you, but you're able to pick out bits of it that do light you up. And
Uh-huh.
so, it doesn't necessarily have to be all or nothing, but, um, yeah, so I'm a parent, if you can't tell. But I
Mhm.
had 2 boys, and I'd
Ah,
love to get your take on that because,
yeah.
you're spending, your time and helping this particular group, women, young women, preteens, but boys are a huge part of their experience, I would imagine. So,
Mhm.
do you have thoughts about boys, young boys, and what you're seeing?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought boys in because it's so interesting because I get a comment a lot to me of like, boys need this, boys need this. Where's the boy version of what you're doing? And I'm like, well, they exist. I know they do. It's not me. But I know the boys need it. And it's also interesting because I feel like boys need it in a different way. Where it's like, I know how girls are wired and I know like they need to open up with their feelings and feel everything and talk it through. And, I know how they're wired in these different ways, whereas boys can be wired in a different way and maybe need to open up in a different way. And there's main differences when it comes to boys versus girls. But I would say it's interesting because I do see a lot from the lens of, especially, let's just go into the kind of typical girl. She's interested in boys. There's that influence going on. There's the worry. A lot of it in relation to boys is around, okay, am I pretty enough? Is my body look good for this guy? Does he like me? Do I like him? So there's those just dating dynamics happening. But I would say from the girl's perspective, I'm constantly helping her to tune into like her intuition, to make sure she's valuing herself, to make sure she's advocating for herself, communicating, really choosing somebody who's good for her, that she's, engaging in that in a healthiest possible way. Now, from the for guy's perspective, and this is just like, okay, what's going on with boys? I do feel in their own way, because there are differences to our brain and how we process things. Guys are experiencing similar things in relation to, and I know this because I have a lot of male friends and I'll just, talk to them and have conversations. I think one is boys aren't, and I'll just kind of speak to some of the things that I notice and I can see. There is a little bit of a confusion around how to approach dating as a guy in today's day and age, because women are gaining their empowerment and standing up for themselves and not putting up for things, and girls are asking guys out, and there's dating apps and there's so much difference happening. And there's a level with the guys of like, do I ask girls out? What do I do? How do I approach this? How do I approach dating apps? How do I approach pursuing somebody? Do they want me to pursue them? Do they want this? What do they want? There's confusion there from a boy's perspective around what is the right way to approach dating a woman nowadays. And, how much talk is too much talk, and how do we approach just all of these different experiences of first date and second date and texting and social media and exclusivity. And I think boys are confused around how to approach that, especially with just, teen girls, young adult women, women in general. So I think that is going on. I think also boys in general are figuring out their own mental health, their own emotions, recognizing that boys are also sensitive. Boys also have feelings. They also have, intuition and a heart and all these other things that I think for so long they weren't given the permission or the space to be sensitive or to feel or to have more of those quote unquote feminine energy type of qualities. And now I think there is a conversation coming forward around boys needing spaces to feel their own emotions and to connect to their instinct and intuition and to approach their mental health and their inner critics and how hard they are on themselves and how they can compete with other boys. So I think a lot of the same thing is going on for boys. It's just slightly different. Like we just want to approach it in a slightly different way. And I personally don't actually know the how behind that. I could try to figure it out, but authentically, I feel like I'm like, I know girls, but boys, I would be like, I know you need to talk about your feelings, but like, how's the best way to approach this? I'm not quite sure, but I know it needs to be approached. And I know there are men doing podcasts talking about these types of things, writing books talking about these types of things, having men's groups and boys groups. And I think that similar to how girls have it, boys need it too. It just, again, it's just how are you approaching the topic of body image with boys, or how are you approaching the topic of dating with boys, or how are you approaching the topic of mental health and your inner critic. There might be a different formula for it, or a different way that a man healthfully emotes versus a woman healthfully emotes.
Yeah. As you were describing that, and as I said, I have 2 sons, they're in their 20s, and boy, I have to say, no pun intended, but, yeah, they're so like us. They're so like girls, so like women. We're so and before we were talking about gender identity and kind of like a fluidity there. And
Mhm.
I think that that so fits because I grew up, I didn't know anything about boys. I had a sister, and that's it.
Mm.
And, my dad, but that's all I really had around me. So boys were a huge mystery. And it wasn't
Mm.
until I had 2 boys of my own that I really got an inside look at
Yeah.
boys. And they're just precious, I have to say,
Mm.
just precious. And they're so real and so sensitive and so thoughtful. And, it almost brings tears to my eyes because I didn't grow up knowing that.
Yeah.
And as all of these lines are blurring, you know,
Mhm.
jobs, careers, gender, all the things that we have been talking about, it seems like when we talk about the dating and they don't know what what the protocol is and all of that, well, that's not surprising because all the lines are blurred, across the board. So it's almost like we just maybe need to support them being authentically who they are.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you have shared is about awareness, ramping
Yeah.
up awareness. And I think if we can help them become more aware, boys, girls, anyone
Mhm.
uh, at that age, perhaps it's something they have to start trusting themselves to navigate because there really aren't the lines, you know,
Mhm.
like there used to be.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's well, one is funny because I grew up with two sisters. So I mean, my mom, we always had a female dog in the house and then two sisters, and I was very close with my dad growing up, but he was also like very emotionally connected and a really great space holder and someone to confide in, but my dad was like the guy, the context of the guy outside the guys I would date, and I didn't know the inside into boys. And in the most recent couple of years, I've been able to thankfully become really good friends with a couple guys. And it's funny because we've all been kind of navigating dating and being single and approaching personal growth and self love and all these topics. And I will have these conversations with them, and I'll think, you are so similar to me. I am overthinking this dating situation the same way you are overthinking your dating situation. And like the inner critic is the same and the thought process around purpose is the same, and it is just interesting to get a peek into the behind the scenes of boys when they really are authentic in themselves and recognize, yeah, outside of just hormonally and certain things, we really are thinking about the same types of things in our own types of ways. So it is fascinating.
That word fluidity is just
Mm,
really hanging in my awareness.
I remember. Yeah, so the next thing is around just the blurred lines, and that's why something I'm really passionate about is teaching people how to listen to their intuition and how to tune in to, right, that inner compass and that part of us that we all have, whether it's a gut feeling or whether it's just a knowing or whether it's a little curiosity going in some type of direction. I think that is what's going to help people figure out the blurred lines and figure out the fluidity and everything changing is, okay, can I, similar to what you said, have awareness, but also be able to connect to myself and my intuition and my inner compass, because ultimately that is going to help me navigate these decisions, these conversations, these choices, these changes, is always having a deep pulse point on what my intuition is telling to me or saying to me in any given moment.
Yeah. And then that's empowerment for everyone. Um, because as we know, the world's changing and more people are not looking outside themselves for who to trust, who to follow. And so this intuition part that you bring up, total, total facilitator of that sort of world.
Mm.
And so it's super exciting. And Shannon, I just have to say thanks for being here again. We're just about ready to wrap up the episode, but is there any last thing that you'd like to share before we do that?
Ooh, well, thank you. Yeah, so much for having me on. This has been a really fun conversation. I'm excited to share it and re-listen to it. And I guess I don't know if there's any last thing that I'd want to share outside of, I guess, when it comes to intuition specifically, because people can ask the how when I give advice like that. Okay, like how do I connect with intuition? How do I know the difference between intuition versus fear? And I'll just pass along one little nugget that's helped me a lot is because there is that navigating between, okay, what's fear? What's my inner critic? What's my ego versus what's real? What's my intuition? What's my truth here? And I just like people to get to know the difference between the two is when it is intuitive, ultimately it's going to feel really safe and grounded in your nervous system. And so if you're getting like a message or a knowing, or you're tuning into a decision to make, or you're visualizing a decision to make, or you're thinking about a conversation with somebody, when you really tune into the guidance or the direction, it feels really safe and grounded. And I think that's how we can lean into and trust, oh, this is intuition here. Maybe this is a message I'm getting, or this is helpful guidance, or whatever it is. Versus if it's fear, if it's your ego, it's not going to feel safe and grounded. It's going to feel very chaotic. It's going to feel very judgmental. It's going to be very in your head. It might be very loud and messy. So just knowing how to go into, okay, kind of that heart, that groundedness, that truth, whether it's coming through journaling, whether it's coming through maybe a Reiki session and you're getting a message, or however it's coming in, it'll feel safe and grounded to your nervous system versus if it's your inner critic, if it's imposter syndrome, if it's judgment, it's going to feel chaotic. It's not going to feel good. It's going to feel heavy, judgmental, critical. And that's how you know you can let that go and not trust in that voice in your head. So I like to help people just understand kind of the different textures to each of them when you're thinking about something like intuition, because I do get that question a lot of just how do I know what's intuition? How do I follow my intuition if I don't feel connected to it? How do I become connected to it? And so that can be like a little bit more on that topic specifically.
That's great. Really practical too.
Yeah.
And if our audience wants to connect with you further, we'll certainly include information for them to do that in the show notes, audio, or the video description on YouTube. But please share with them how best to connect with you.
Amazing. Yes. So you can find me through my name, Shannon Keating, and my website is shannonkeating.com. Instagram is at Shannon Keating. And those would be the best two places to find me. Email is hello@shannonkeating.com. But if you find my Instagram or you find my website, you'll be able to get connected to everything I have available.
All the things through the website. Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much again, Shannon. It's really been really enlightening, and I've enjoyed talking about the young ones,
Mm-hmm.
those up and coming, exciting times for sure. So thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And thank you to everyone for listening.
And from myself and the team here at Beyond the Reiki Gateway, we'd like to say thank you to our listeners for all of your support, including leaving great reviews, becoming BTRG insiders, and sharing this show with your friends and family. Drop us a line at info@beyondthereikigateway.com anytime. Tell us what's on your mind and take great care. Until next time. Thank you again for joining me. Please check the description underneath this video to learn more, connect with us, and get some important information about your listening experience. Wishing you all the best until we meet again beyond the Reiki Gateway.